The morning light poured gently through the tall windows of the International Technology Summit in New Delhi. Journalists, engineers, ministers, and students all sat in neat rows, their eyes fixed on the grand stage where something extraordinary was about to unfold. Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, was expected to speak in just a few minutes. The air buzzed with excitement. Camera lights blinked. Phones were already recording. Everyone wanted to witness the moment. But Sundar was not smiling. He stood backstage with his head down, his hands folded in front of him. Dressed in a simple gray suit, his expression was unreadable. He wasn't nervous. He had spoken at places far bigger than this: Stanford, the White House, Silicon Valley. But today, something felt heavier, different. Just a few steps away sat his mother, Lakshmi Pichai. Her sari was modest, a deep maroon color with golden threads stitched into it. Her hair was tied neatly. Her eyes, however, never left her son. Beside her sat India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. He had been invited as the chief guest, and his presence added pressure. The crowd, the media, even the young students, all waited for something inspiring. But Sundar did not step forward when the host called his name. The host looked confused. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sundar Pichai, the pride of India." The host repeated with a forced smile. The applause started, soft at first, then louder. The room echoed with claps and cheers. But Sundar didn't move. Lakshmi saw it, not the hesitation, the pain, a quiet pain only a mother could see. She stood up slowly, placing one hand on the chair for support, and began walking toward the stage. There were gasps in the crowd, confusion, whispers. Was Sundar sick? Was something wrong? Modi's expression changed slightly. He leaned forward. His eyes followed Lakshmi as she climbed the stairs onto the stage, without a microphone. She turned toward the crowd and spoke. Her voice was soft, old, but firm. "My son does not speak, because his heart is too full." The room fell silent. Lakshmi turned her head to look directly at the Prime Minister. "He remembers the streets of Chennai," she said. "He remembers standing in line for a bucket of water. He remembers borrowing textbooks, because we could, not buy them. He remembers the first time he touched a computer and how far that single moment carried him." Modi listened carefully. "Today, you see Sundar Pichai, a man with big titles. But I see the boy who came home in the rain, holding his shoes in one hand, because they had torn open. He didn't want to make the floor dirty." Lakshmi's eyes sparkled. "He is silent today not because he is proud, but because he is overwhelmed. Sometimes silence holds more truth than 1,000 words." A deep hush spread over the hall. Even the cameras didn't blink. Even the air felt still. Sundar finally stepped forward. His face was wet not from sweat, but from something deeper. He didn't wipe his tears. He didn't hide them. He stood beside his mother. He took her hand. The host, frozen at the side, didn't know what to say. Lakshmi turned back to the crowd. "When you see a person like him, do not clap for his power. Clap for the days he had none. That is where strength is born." The crowd stood up. First one person, then 5, then all. An unexpected standing ovation. Modi stood too, not because he had to, but because something in Lakshmi's words had pierced even the armor of politics. The cameras captured it all, but for once, it didn't feel like a show. It felt like a moment. Afterward, when Sundar finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost broken. "I was going to talk about technology," he said, "but my mother just reminded me that the most powerful engine we have is love." The crowd clapped again, this time softer, with respect, as they stepped off stage together. Lakshmi leaned toward Sundar and whispered something. He smiled for the first time that day. But the story was just beginning, because behind Lakshmi's calm voice was a secret, a story she had never told anyone, not even her son. The hotel suite was quiet that evening. Far above the bustling city, Sundar stood by the window, looking down at the glowing lights of New Delhi. The summit was over for the day. The applause had faded. The cameras had stopped. But his mind wouldn't rest. His mother's words echoed in his heart, gentle but heavy, more powerful than any speech he could have given. She had carried their story on her shoulders like a folded blanket, only unfolding it when the world needed warmth. He turned. Slowly. Lakshmi sat on the couch behind him, pouring 2 small cups of tea. Her hands were steady, her eyes focused. Amma, Sundar said softly. She looked up. I didn't know you were going to speak. Lakshmi smiled gently and pushed one of the cups toward him. You didn't, she said, because I never had to before. He sat down beside her. The silence between them was calm, but deep like a river that hides stones beneath its surface. That day, Sundar paused, when my shoes tore, and I came home in the rain. You didn't say anything then either. Lakshmi stirred her tea slowly. Some days, words are like salt, she said. Too much, and they spoil everything. He nodded, but something still sat heavy in his chest. Amma, he said again, this time more firmly. You looked at Modi like you knew something he didn't, like there was more you could have said. She didn't respond at first. Then, quietly, she looked into her tea, as if reading a memory inside it. There was something I didn't say, she whispered. Not because it was shameful, but because it was yours. Mine, Sundar asked, confused. Lakshmi set the cup down. You remember, when you were 9, when Appa lost his job at the factory? Sundar's face tightened. Yes. Do you remember what happened after that? He thought for a moment. You started stitching clothes again. Appa sold his bicycle. I remember the light bulb going out, and we couldn't afford to replace it for weeks. She nodded slowly, but then her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. One night she said, you fell asleep early. I thought you were resting. Sundar leaned in. But you weren't, she continued. You had fainted. Your body gave up for a moment. From hunger, you hadn't eaten in 2 days. His breath caught. What? Lakshmi closed her eyes. Her voice steady, despite the pain. We had only 2 rotis left. Your father gave one to you. I gave mine to him, and I pretended I wasn't hungry. But you had given yours to your younger cousin when he visited. You said you weren't hungry either. A tear slid down her cheek. You were just a child, soon, but you already carried others before yourself. Sundar sat frozen. He couldn't remember that day clearly. He remembered the dim light, the sound of rain on the roof, but not the hunger. Not the moment he collapsed. Why didn't you ever tell me? He asked, his voice shaking. Because you grew up fine, she whispered. You didn't need the memory, you needed the future. Outside the window, the city lights blurred in his eyes. He took her hand slowly. Amma, all this time, I thought I became strong because I studied hard, because I worked hard, but now I know. I just stood on the strength you gave me. She smiled gently. You were always strong, she said. But sometimes, even strong people forget where they come from. He lowered his head, her hand still in his. I forgot to thank you, he whispered. Not just for the food, but for every little thing. Lakshmi squeezed his fingers gently. You don't have to thank me, she said, but you do have to remember. And then her voice grew softer. Because the world is watching you now, and one day, someone like you will be sitting in a dark room, hungry and scared, waiting for a light. You can be that light, soon, but only if you never forget the darkness you once knew. A long silence followed. Then a knock came at the door. It was a staff member from the Prime Minister's office. Sir, he said with hesitation, the Prime Minister wishes to meet you and your mother privately. He said it was urgent. Sundar looked at Lakshmi. She simply nodded. Let's go, she said. But as they walked down the hall, Sundar noticed something in her walks, something quiet but tense, as if the secret she had just shared wasn't the only one she had kept, and deep inside, he knew this night wasn't over. The past wasn't done speaking yet. Sundar walked beside his mother, their footsteps soft against the marble tiles of the Prime Minister's residence. Security guards stood like statues. Golden lighting washed over portraits of India's great leaders hanging on the walls. The air felt heavy, not with fear, but with something deeper, expectation. Lakshmi said nothing as they walked. Sundar glanced at her. Her hands were folded calmly in front of her, but her fingers kept brushing against one another, like someone solving a puzzle only she could see. He had known her all his life, but tonight, it felt like he was just beginning to know her. The staff led them to a private room. It was warm, quiet, simple. Prime Minister Modi stood by the window, his back to them, hands behind him. He didn't turn right away. He seemed to be looking out over the city like he was thinking about something older than politics, something personal. Then slowly, he turned. His face was calm, but focused. "Please, sit," he said gently. They sat. A moment passed in silence. Then he looked directly at Lakshmi. "Your words moved more hearts today than any speech I have heard in years," he said. Lakshmi nodded politely. "I did not plan to speak," she replied, "but my son's silence said more than any script." Modi folded his hands on the table. "I want to understand something," he said. "You looked at me in a way today that carried history. Not just personal pain, but something else." Lakshmi's face didn't change, but Sundar could feel the tension beside him. Modi continued, "When I was younger," he said, "I used to sell tea at a railway station. I saw mothers feed their children and go hungry themselves. I know sacrifice. But today, when you spoke, I felt something familiar, and yet different." Lakshmi's voice was soft. "We all carry our own stories," she said. "Some are loud, some are quiet, but every mother carries one she never tells." Sundar looked at her. "Double quotes, AMMA, he whispered. "What is it?" Her eyes met his, and slowly, her walls began to fall. "Before your father got the job at the factory," she said, "we were not just poor, we were invisible. No one would rent us a room. No one would give me sewing work. They said we were cursed." Modi's eyes narrowed slightly, curious. "Cursed?" Lakshmi nodded. "Your father's brother had taken a loan from a powerful man," she said. "He couldn't pay it back. He ran away. And the man, he made a list of everyone in our family. He told the village that anyone who helped us would face the same punishment." Sundar felt the air leave his lungs. "I never knew this," he whispered. Lakshmi smiled faintly. "We didn't tell you. You were too small. We carried you from town to town. Some nights we slept in train stations, other nights under temple stairs." She looked down, and then one night, your fever wouldn't go down. We had no money for medicine. Modi leaned forward. "What did you do?" Her voice trembled. "I went back to the same man," she said. "I begged him. I fell at his feet. I told him if he let us be, I would never ask for anything again." A tear slid down her cheek. "He gave me one small pill, not because he forgave us, but because he said watching me beg was payment enough." Sundar felt like his world was shifting. "I can't believe this," he said quietly. "Amma, you never told me. Not even once." Lakshmi placed her hand over his. "What would it have changed, Sundar?" she asked. "You were meant to fly. Why weigh your wings with the chains of our past?" Modi sat back in his chair. He looked thoughtful, not political, not powerful, just human. "I understand now," he said. He looked at Sundar. "Your silence wasn't weakness, it was respect. And your mother's voice was the voice of a generation that built India without ever asking for applause." He stood up slowly. "Didn't ask you here just to thank you," he said. "I asked you here because I want something from you. Lakshmi and Sundar exchanged a glance. Modi walked to a small cabinet and returned with an old, worn file. He placed it on the table. "This," he said, "is a list of 100 families who once lived just like yours, invisible, ignored, still, forgotten. No electricity, no school, no clean water." He looked at Sundar. "You are a symbol to the world, but now I ask you to be something more." Sundar's voice was quiet. "What do you want me to do?" Modi smiled gently. "Remember them and help them rise." Lakshmi touched the file with trembling fingers. Sundar looked at his mother. "Should I?" he asked softly. She smiled with tears in her eyes. "You already know the answer," she whispered. "You just needed to hear the question." Modi stepped forward. "I will support you," he said. "But this story, this mission, it must come from you. Not as a CEO, but as a son. As a man who once went hungry in the rain." Sundar closed his eyes. The image of the torn shoes, the broken bulb, the 2 rotis, the memory of fainting without knowing why. He opened his eyes again, clear, strong, double quotes. "Then let's start," he said. "Not tomorrow, now." Lakshmi smiled, but even as the Prime Minister nodded in agreement, Sundar noticed something strange. A small photo had fallen out of the file, an old black and white picture. It showed a young woman sitting beside a man, both thin, tired, and holding a child in their lap. Sundar's heart stopped. It was his mother, but the man next to her wasn't his father. He looked up at her. "Amma, who is this?" Her face changed, just for a second, but it was enough. Something she had hidden even deeper was rising, and the truth was just one question away. Sundar held the old photo in his hand. His fingers trembled slightly. The black and white image felt heavier than paper. His mother sat in it, her features younger but unmistakable. Tired eyes, a quiet strength in her arms, and beside her, holding a child who looked just like him, was a man he did not recognize. Not his father, not anyone he had ever seen. The room was quiet. Modi glanced at Lakshmi, but said nothing. It was not his place to speak. Not now. Lakshmi looked at the photo, then away, her hands folded in her lap again, her lips pressed into a thin line, the same way she did when she used to hide worry behind patience. But Sundar had grown. He could see through it now. "Amma," he asked gently, "who is this?" Lakshmi did not answer right away. She looked down at the table, then at Sundar. Then finally, she closed her eyes and breathed in deeply. "You deserve the truth," she said softly. Sundar leaned forward. Lakshmi's voice trembled. "That man was the reason you had food for the first 6 months of your life." Sundar blinked. Double quotes. "What?" Lakshmi nodded slowly. "After your birth, your father had nothing. I had no strength left after delivery. We had no work, no money, and your health was weak. Your cry was soft, almost like a bird." She swallowed hard. This man was a stranger, a kind one. He worked at a post office. He found me sitting outside with you in my arms. He asked no questions, just bought milk, brought food, helped me stand. Sundar felt his throat tighten. "Did Appa know?" "He knew later," she whispered, "and he accepted it, because the man left after 3 weeks. He said he had his own family far away. He only wanted to help." She touched the photo. "We never saw him again, but we kept this photo as a reminder that not all strangers are cruel." Modi spoke now, his voice careful. "Sometimes a nameless hand changes a life forever." Lakshmi nodded. "We were too proud to tell anyone," she said. "And later, when your father got work, we decided to bury that chapter. It did not change our family, but it kept you alive long enough to become who you are." Sundar looked at the photo again. "So, this man saved my life." "Yes," Lakshmi said. A silence followed. Then Sundar whispered, "Do we know his name?" Lakshmi shook her head. "No. He only said he was passing through. He never told us where he was going. Modi leaned forward, thoughtful. Then maybe it's time we try to find him. Or his family. This story is not just yours anymore. Sundar stood up, pacing slowly. His mind raced through years of forgotten questions. Pieces that now made sense. The generosity his parents had always shown to strangers. The way they never judged the poor. The way his mother never let anyone leave her house hungry. She had been paying forward a debt she couldn't repay. What if he's gone? Sundar asked softly. Lakshmi smiled sadly. Then we thank his spirit. Modi tapped the file gently. And help others in his name. Sundar sat back down. He looked at his mother. You carried this all alone. No, she said. I carried it with every mother who fed her child in silence. With every father who walked barefoot so his son could wear shoes. We all carry something, Sundar. You just forgot to ask. He nodded slowly. His voice was quiet. I want to remember now. Over the next few weeks. Something changed. Not in headlines, but in hearts. Sundar launched a project quietly. The Unknown Helper Fund. Not named after himself. Not tied to any brand. It had one goal. Find forgotten families, lost villages, and quiet heroes. And lift them. No cameras. No press. Just work. Lakshmi visited schools in poor neighborhoods. Not as a guest, but as a mother. She told them stories, sat with children, cooked with teachers, listened. Modi visited an old post office in Gujarat, where he heard stories about a kind man who once disappeared after helping a young woman and her baby. Nothing certain, but hope stirred. And one evening, as Sundar sat reading letters from children who now had running water for the first time, he found one envelope marked with strange handwriting. Inside it was a photo, another black and white picture, a younger version of the same man, holding a baby, on the back. One sentence was written, he never forgot the child he saved. Sundar stared at it for a long time. Then he called his mother. When she answered, he didn't speak right away. He just said, Uma, I think we've been found. Lakshmi said nothing, but he could hear her soft crying on the other end, and somehow, in that moment, he felt something settle in his chest. A peace, not the peace of success, but the peace of remembering where it all began. The rain fell gently that evening, not like a storm, not like a warning, just soft, steady drops like memories, knocking on the windows of Sundar's heart. He stood near the window of his childhood home in Chennai. The old house had been cleaned up, repainted, but the walls still remembered the cries, the laughter, and the silence of years gone by. He turned as he heard the creak of the door behind him. Lakshmi entered, holding a cup of warm milk. You haven't slept? She said softly. He shook his head. I keep looking at the picture. She sat beside him, on the old wooden bench, placing the cup in his hand. The second photo. He nodded. The handwriting. The way he held me. It feels real, Amma. Like he always watched from far away. Lakshmi looked down. Sometimes, people leave not because they don't care, but because they care too much. He looked at her. You think he stayed away to protect us? Maybe, she whispered. Or maybe he believed his part was over once we were standing. The rain tapped gently on the glass. Then a soft knock came at the front door. They looked at each other. Sundar stood and walked slowly to the entrance. When he opened it, he found a middle-aged man standing there, soaked but calm. His umbrella rested against his shoulder. His eyes were kind, deep brown, familiar in a strange way. In his hands, he held a small metal box. He said nothing, just smiled. Yes, Sundar asked politely. The man nodded. I'm sorry to come uninvited. He said I only want to return something. Sundar frowned slightly. Return what? The man opened the box slowly. Inside was an old, worn blanket and a faded paper, yellowed with time. Sundar unfolded it. Written in the same handwriting from the second photo were the words, I held you once. I never forgot. I stayed away, but I watched your light. Beneath that, a name, Venkatesh Anand. Sundar looked up sharply. His voice trembled. Venkatesh, are you? The man smiled gently. Yes, your mother called me a stranger, and I was, but only for a little while. Lakshmi appeared behind Sundar, her hand covering her mouth. Her eyes were wide. You? She whispered. You were real? Venkatesh bowed slightly. I didn't come to ask for anything, he said. I only came to say, thank you, for making every sacrifice worth it. He looked at Sundar. You changed the world, boy. But first, you changed mine. They welcomed him in, not as a guest, but as family that night. The three of them sat together for hours. No cameras, no microphones, just stories. Venkatesh told them how he had been a young widower at the time, how he had seen Lakshmi holding Sundar outside a railway station, how something inside him broke when he saw the baby's tiny fingers shaking in the wind. I had lost my own child, he said. Helping yours gave me a reason to live again. Lakshmi cried softly. Why did you never return? Because you didn't need me, he replied. And I didn't want to confuse the child. I thought, maybe one day he'll find me. And, if not, I'll keep watching. I followed your story, every step. I kept the newspaper articles, the interviews. I was proud, from the shadows. Sundar touched the paper again. You gave me life, he whispered. Venkatesh shook his head gently. No, you gave life back to me. Outside, the rain stopped. The sky slowly cleared, and inside that small home, hearts that had once broken quietly, now healed quietly. The next morning, something changed. Sundar held a press conference, but not to talk about Google, not to talk about AI. He walked onto the stage with Venkatesh and Lakshmi by his side, and he told the full story. No edits, no pride, just truth, and the world listened, not with claps, but with tears. He announced the next phase of the unknown. Helper Fund, not just money, but memorials, for unsung heroes, for the nameless strangers who carried others when no one was. Watching walls of gratitude would be built across India, with names, photos, or even blank tiles, with just 2 words, you mattered. Modi supported it fully. He said, a country becomes great, not through power, but through memory. And Lakshmi stood quietly at every ceremony, holding a candle, one for each story that would never fade again. That evening, back in Chennai, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Venkatesh handed Sundar one last letter. What's this? Sundar asked. Venkatesh smiled. A letter to your future child. Sundar opened it, slowly. It read, Dear one, your father was once saved by a stranger. That stranger became part of your family. Always remember, kindness travels across generations. Be someone's stranger. Be someone's light. Sundar closed the letter with tears in his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he felt whole. Weeks passed, then months, but the story of Venkatesh, Lakshmi, and Sundar did not fade. It traveled through villages where internet barely reached. It played softly through classroom speakers in government schools. It echoed across social media, not as a trend, but as a gentle reminder that behind every great man or woman, there is often a quiet hero. Unseen. News channels tried to spin it into headlines. Google's CEO finds forgotten savior. Mother's truth melts millions of hearts. But Sundar refused to let it become noise. He made one thing clear. This is not my story. This is our story. It belongs to every stranger, whoever gave without expecting anything in return. He launched the Light Project, a global platform where anyone could write anonymous thank you letters to people who helped them in small but life-changing ways. Some wrote about bus drivers who waited an extra second, some about neighbors who brought food during lockdowns, some wrote to mothers, to fathers, to teachers who gave free lessons under streetlights. The The response was overwhelming. 10 million letters within the first 2 months. One letter went viral. It read, "Dear Uncle from the train, you gave me your slippers when mine broke. I was ashamed. You said nothing, just smiled. I'm now an engineer, and I never forgot your silence. Thank you." From the barefoot boy at Platform 9, back in Chennai. Sundar's childhood home had become a quiet landmark. Not a tourist site, just a place where people came to feel something real. Venkatesh visited often. He never stayed too long, just enough to smile at Lakshmi, SIPT, and tell Sundar he was proud. Then he'd leave, saying he wanted no more attention. He had done his part. But one morning, Lakshmi received a call. Venkatesh had passed away peacefully in his sleep. A small diary was found beside him. Inside were clippings of Sundar's life from school, achievements to Google News, and one final note. "I did not live to be remembered, but I am glad I was not forgotten." Lakshmi held the note to her chest and wept softly. Sundar placed the diary on a shelf next to their family photos, not under glass, not behind a frame, just there within reach. A year later, at a school in a remote village in Bihar, a young girl stood before her class. She was nervous, but she held a printed photo in her hand, a picture of Sundar, Lakshmi, and Venkatesh standing together. "This is my favorite story," she said, "because it teaches us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear old shirts, and sometimes they leave without names." The teacher asked her what she wanted to be. She smiled. "Someone's light." The class clapped, not because she was clever, but because they all understood. In a quiet ceremony by the ocean, Sundar and Lakshmi stood beside a small stone bench newly placed near the waves. Etched into the stone were simple words. "One stranger's kindness can shape 1,000 lives. No name, no brand, just truth." Years later, when Sundar was asked in an interview what his greatest achievement was, he didn't mention Google. He didn't mention any award. He simply said, "When I stopped searching for success and started remembering where it all began." The interviewer paused, then asked, "And where did it begin?" Sundar smiled, "With my mother's silence and a stranger's kindness." That night, Lakshmi lit a small lamp at the temple steps. She closed her eyes, whispered a prayer, and left the flame flickering against the wind. A little boy passing by stopped. He watched it quietly, and something inside him stirred. A story without words, a warmth without explanation, and maybe, just maybe, a spark for the next light. The sun had just started to rise. A golden light spread slowly across the streets of Chennai, painting every rooftop, window pane, and tree branch with quiet warmth. Birds chirped softly, unaware of the weight the morning carried for the Pichai family. Today marked 1 year since Venkatesh's passing. The man whose quiet kindness had saved a life and changed millions more had now become more than a memory. He had become a movement. Across India, across the world, people were remembering the value of small acts, of untold sacrifices, of unsung heroes. But for Sundar and Lakshmi, today was not about speeches or events. Today was about going back one last time to the very place where everything had once begun. They stood quietly at Platform 9 of the old railway station. Nothing much had changed. Same cracked tiles, same worn benches. But to Sundar, it now felt like the most sacred place in the world. Lakshmi gently placed a marigold flower on the ground near the pillar where she once sat with her baby in her arms. She looked at her son, now a man known around the world, and smiled. "This was where you first opened your eyes to the world," she whispered, "and this is where someone saw you." Sundar knelt beside the flower, placing his hand on the ground. "I never thought it would matter," he said, "but now I know. It matters more than anything." Lakshmi looked around at the others arriving at the station, a vendor, a mother, a student with torn sandals. None of them knew they were standing on sacred ground, but Sundar knew, and because he knew, He had made a decision. "Amma," he said gently, "I'm leaving Google." Lakshmi turned slowly. "What?" He looked up, his eyes clear. "I've done my part there. I gave what I could, but now, I want to build something that reminds people what really matters." She stayed silent, but her eyes glistened. "I want to build schools in Venkatesh's name," Sundar continued. "Not big ones, just honest ones, where children learn not just science but kindness, humility, service." Lakshmi sat beside him, on the bench. "And what will you call them?" He smiled. "Lighthouses," she chuckled softly. "A school named after light." "Because that's what he gave me," Sundar said. "And that's what I want to give." Months later, the first lighthouse opened in a village outside Madurai. There were no advertisements, no VIP guests, just a chalkboard, a handful of books, and children with eyes full of dreams. On the wall inside was a photo. Venkatesh, Lakshmi, Sundar, as a child. Beneath it, a line, "Be the reason someone remembers hope." The lighthouses grew. Slowly, carefully, like trees, planted with love. No child was turned away, no teacher went unpaid. Sundar used his savings, not donations, to build each one. And when asked why he didn't use a big foundation, he always gave the same answer: because some gifts should stay quiet. Years passed. Lakshmi grew older. Her hair turned fully silver. Her steps slowed, but her voice never lost its strength. She visited each school, sat with the children, and told them the same story. "Once, a stranger gave my baby milk. Now, my baby gives the world light." On her final birthday, Sundar gave her a small wooden box. Inside it was a letter. He read it aloud beside her bed. "Oma, you carried me when I couldn't walk. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And when I stood still in silence, you stood up for me. This world knows my name, but only because you gave me yours first, Mother." Lakshmi reached for his hand, and with her last breath, she whispered, "And now, the light is yours to carry." After her passing, Sundar didn't stop. He opened 100 lighthouses across India, then 10 more across Africa, then Southeast Asia, not to expand, but to honor. In each classroom, a candle sat near the entrance, not to be lit with fire, but with kindness. Whenever a child did something selfless, the teacher would ring a bell and say, "You lit the candle today." The children would smile, not for rewards, but for the joy of being someone's light. At the final memorial ceremony, Sundar stood alone, on a stage in front of thousands of students, parents, and teachers. But he didn't give a speech. He simply held up 2 torn shoes, the same ones he had kept all these years, and he said, "I wore these when I had nothing, but they walked me toward everything. Not because I was smart, not because I was lucky, but because someone cared. And I want you all to know, you can be that someone. You can always be someone's beginning." The crowd stood silently, some with tears, some with smiles, but all with understanding. And so the story that began on a quiet platform with a hungry child and a kind stranger never truly ended. Because every act of love leaves an echo, and every echo becomes someone's start. And in the heart of every child who walked through the door of a lighthouse, that echo lived on, not loud, but steady, like a heartbeat, like a flame, like the circle that never breaks.